Inclusion as part of the new Ofsted framework. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready and are you confident? I am delighted to welcome Natasha, who is this week's special guest. As you can see, for those of you that are watching us today from EK Outreach Services. Natasha, good morning. Thank you for joining us. We're delighted to have you with us.
Good morning. Thanks, Matt.
Ladies and gentlemen, so you've dialed in, you're listening in, YouTube, Spotify, because this particular title, this theme, must be of real interest to you. It's around inclusion. It's a part of the new Ofsted framework. There's so much discussion, debate, so much, how what will the HMI inspectors look for, questions that they ask, evidence that they're asked to, that you would be asked to provide. So this is really, really interesting. So again, inclusion as a part of the new Ofsted framework. Natasha, we're delighted to have you. Just set the scene a little bit. Tell us about Natasha. Tell us a little bit about you to set the scene, if you would.
Well, thank you. So I've been in education for over 20 years. I have worked across mainstream, I've worked across special, and I've worked in inclusion and alternative education. And my roles have always been from the very beginning around sort of SEND, inclusion, that sort of pastoral care side of the schooling. And my experience spans from teaching, all the way up to head of year, senior leadership, and now as a head. And I work really closely with schools and local authorities to ensure we embed inclusion in sort of real practical ways, not just
Yeah.
sort of on paper. And a lot of my work focuses on the safeguarding and attendance side of it and the inclusion. And we've been doing a lot of work recently on the new Ofsted framework and
Yeah.
supporting schools to be able to move beyond the compliance and towards sort of genuine,
Yeah.
safe and inclusive practices for learners.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's we've been producing articles and talking about it, and we're really sort of digging into the depths of what this new framework looks like and what it means for schools.
That's great, Natasha. Thank you. And if there is such a thing as what does a typical ish day look like for you and for EK Outreach Services? What does that look like on a typical day
I
supporting schools and mats?
I don't think there is a typical day. I don't think there's any kind of typical day at all. But it is about working together and looking at the individuals, all of the students that we work with, that we support across schools and with schools to support in schools. They are all individuals, and we have to look at their needs
Yeah.
and their triggers and what's going to work within that setting, and also what's not going to work in that setting, or if that
Mm.
setting really is not the right place for them to be. But there's lots of discussions, lots of meeting, lots of face to face, which is fantastic.
Interesting. Thank you very much indeed. And I think that tailors and just dovetails perfectly into our first of our three main angles and scenarios
Mm.
and questions today, Natasha, which is inclusion as a challenge. So it's been a challenge a long time, not just as a part of the new Ofsted framework, but
Yeah.
what is the core challenges and struggles and hurdles that schools and mat leaders have to jump over to facilitate effective inclusion? What are those challenges, please?
I think the biggest challenge for schools and mats under this new sort of Ofsted framework is that inclusion and safeguarding are no longer standalone considerations.
Yeah.
They run through everything now. And that is a significant shift for schools. It means leaders can no longer rely on sort of strong send paperwork or, having a really good alternative provision in place in isolation. It means that inspectors now are looking across curriculum, they're looking across attendance, they're
Yeah.
looking at behaviour, safeguarding, and outcomes all simultaneously. And for many schools, SEND has risen over the years. We're
Yeah.
very clear across the country that the SEND needs have risen, particularly around, I would say, EBSA, that emotional based school avoidance, the SEMH, the trauma, a lot more autism diagnosis and ADHD diagnosis coming out, and anxiety based absences are huge across the country. And those learners don't fit neatly into a traditional system. They really
Mm.
don't. And schools are under pressure to demonstrate how they're meeting those needs. And now, what the Ofsted framework is looking at is before crisis point. So, not okay, now they're at exclusion or
Yeah.
now they've had a long term absence. It's what have you done in the lead up to this? What's been put in place? And that all has to be evidenced and documented and be seen.
Mm.
Um, And I think there's a safeguarding challenge as well. You know, pupils who are not regularly attending or who are educated off site or have a flexible part-time timetable are now very clearly in Ofsted's safeguarding lens. Before it was accepted that that's where those people went. But now schools and MATs, must be able to evidence that oversight, that monitoring, that accountability, when a provision is delivered elsewhere. And the words that are used within the framework is substantial evidence. And I think that is the big difference from before, because what they're looking at is tell me what you're doing. And now I want to see reams of evidence behind it to make sure that it is the right thing.
Thank
Um,
you. And I think one of the key points there that you've kindly shared, which is interesting and extremely valuable, is it's not the reaction point when something happens.
yeah,
It's to have it full stop, have it a build up, a almost like a culture. It's something that goes through. It's a part of something, not just reacting at the end there.
yeah, yeah,
That's really
absolutely.
interesting. And to have substantial, obviously
Mm,
that word is also subjective, but a
yeah,
very powerful word, to have substantial evidence and documentation, whatever that may be. That's
yeah.
really interesting. Thank you. Um, let's flip it around. So, with all of the hundreds of schools and mats that you are working with day in, day
Mm,
out, week in, week out, what are you seeing, hearing, observing, privileged to, talk through, discuss? What are the schools and mats trying to do themselves, Natasha, in
mm.
this area? But not just to be compliant with the new framework, but
Yeah,
for all of those right reasons, which is something you said at the beginning.
yeah. And I think it is about a shift now. And
Mm,
I think that's very clear. Schools and MATs are very clear what the framework says. And so they have to move into that shift mode, but for the long term. And I think the key solution is, like you said, being reactive to actually being strategic about their
mm,
inclusion.
mm,
They can't sit solely with the Senko and the pastoral team anymore. And I think a lot of head teachers have come to that realization that they need to actively be part of the pastoral side of the school, of that inclusion side. And it has to be embedded at leadership level and appropriate time given to the Senkos and the inclusion teams to work together and to execute these new strategies and to make them work.
mm.
I think that's really key and something, lots of schools have adapted and are doing really, really well. Um, they need to start by being really clear on what inclusion is in their context.
Yeah.
Even within MATs, you could have a MAT of 20, 30 schools. Each school is going to do it differently. There's no way to strategically run something across the school that's going to work for everyone. Um, but they need to look at their own attendance data, their own exclusion patterns, their own SEND trends, and their own safeguarding concerns, not just EHCP numbers, but using all that early identification and all the data that they've got to graduate a response so that when inspectors come into the school, they're not seeing people reacting too late. They're
Yeah.
intervening prior to that. Um, and another solution I think that a lot of them are working towards is strengthening those internal systems and the communication they have, those sort of clear routes for attendance reporting, where that attendance report goes once it's been done. When safeguarding is escalated, who takes it from there? At what point does it get passed on to an external source, but who keeps hold of it to make sure they know what's going on? And monitoring
Mm,
the offsite provisions, like us, is essential. Schools now have to be able to articulate who's responsible for what, which leaders are maintaining oversight of those APs. Um, and that may be in some schools expanding SLT roles or bringing new members into the team to make sure that you have enough oversight of all these things that are taking place. And curriculum flexibility, I think, is one of the biggest things we've been working on with schools. It doesn't mean lowering expectations. That's not what we're talking about. It means adapting delivery so that all pupils can learn and all pupils can still be ambitious in different ways. And I think Matt's tend to do this really, really well. Having planned, quality assured sort of approaches. Rather than sort of ad hoc arrangements in each classroom, but it is making sure that they're fit for the pupils that are there. Um,
mm,
and my final thing, I think, really is staff confidence.
yeah.
There is an innate fear of
Yeah.
send. There is innate fear of inclusion. And I think that, the new framework sort of only added to that sort of hype around it. But, if you've got ongoing CPD and your staff are SEND or trained, have training in EBSA, then that inclusive, consistent practice becomes consistent and not dependent on the one or two members in the school that know what to do or how to do it. So I think schools investing in staff capability tends to have a lot more evidence and a lot more impact behind it.
That's really interesting. And yeah, you beat me to it at the end there. That I was thinking as you were sharing that, I was thinking for a staff member to be really confident, they've got to be invested in.
Yeah.
What does that investment look like? Training, coaching, feedback, support.
Mm.
Um, Great point. But also schools and mats having, I guess you could call it confidence, but knowing organizations like yourselves who are there to help and support them,
Yeah,
to reach out, to have
absolutely.
a conversation, whether it's
Yeah.
strategic, whether it's about a learner,
Yeah.
a cohort of learners, but rather than just holding it close to the chest, how are we going to get through? What are we going to
Yeah.
do? To actually reach out and engage and partner with an expert person such as yourself and your organization.
Yeah.
But that's really, really interesting. I think as well, just going back to that individual, um, I used the word earlier, culture, didn't I? And I think the more that you're sharing your
Yeah.
experiences with us, it's a strategic shift and it's a cultural shift. It's no longer on one person, it's
Mm.
everybody. But I guess ultimately it's accountability, isn't it?
Yeah.
Who's going to
Yeah.
own it and not make sure it doesn't drop? Who's going to have all of the evidence should the time come where they have to produce that evidence? Interesting, really, really
Mm.
interesting. I would love to learn how your organization helps and supports these multi-academy trusts with inclusion, not just as a part of their framework, of course, but in general to facilitate world-class inclusion. What does that look like,
Yeah.
Natasha, please?
Well, we are a bespoke alternative provision. So we will take referrals via local authorities or schools, MAT trusts, and then we are able to provide outreach support. We can provide a joint support. So it could be that, schools are struggling, they need a little bit of time to be able to work with this child, and being in school 5 days a week doesn't work for them.
Yeah,
It might well be that we work in that sort of partnership. It might well be we take the child on with the idea of transitioning back at a later date, or it may be that we go into the school and we work with the school staff and the young person or the child in the school to try and break down those barriers and eliminate some of those things that aren't working there. It could also be that we just go in for advice. We've done most recently quite a few days in school where we're just having a walk around, we're just having a talk with SLTs and Senkos and having a look around schools and saying, what else can we do? What can we trial? What have you done already? What else is there to embed into the school? And we work with the most complex children
mm,
and young adults, and our work is always outcome focused and aligned to sort of Ofsted, local authorities, and the expectations around sort of safeguarding attendance and progress for those particular pupils. I think what makes our approach different is that we don't just take pupils away from schools. We partner with the school, we partner with the trust, and we help leaders to evidence that oversight, that quality assurance, and that impact, which is crucial under the new framework. And our provision is planned and reviewed and monitored, and we report back every 6 weeks. And so we work really closely. We have had 16 quality assurance visits to date this academic year.
yeah,
And, thankfully, we have come out with, fantastic results across the board and not a single action in any one of the boroughs that has sort of, or one of the trusts that's come to visit us,
yeah.
which is fantastic because we want to strategically support. We want to help design those coherent inclusive models, curriculums, the early intervention, the short-term placements, the reintegration planning, the post-16 planning, because that's also, coming in now much more about careers and transition and moving forward with adulthood. And importantly, I think we understand the pressure school are under. We've come from mainstream ourselves. A lot of us, we understand the pressure that they're in. We understand the pressures that are coming, in terms of budgets and reforms and Ofsteds. And our staff are experienced, trauma-informed professionals who work with the hardest to reach children. So our aim is always to support schools to remain inclusive, compliant, and confident, even in the most challenging circumstances. And I myself, I'm a huge SEND advocate. I work with schools and provision to implement strategies around this and give advice on the hardest to reach. So, like you said before, it may not be that you need our service necessarily, but it may be that you're stuck on something and you need a
Yeah,
little bit of help and support. And, I am more than happy. If I know the answer, I will more than happily share it with you, and give that understanding. What we want is to take away the fear and the pressure
yeah.
around SEN and inclusion.
That's really interesting. Thank you very, very much. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you'll want to pick up with Natasha, pick her brains, talk about different scenarios, situations, experiences. I'm sure there's been lots and lots of threads and discussions throughout this podcast this morning where you were thinking, I need to have a chat with Natasha and just pick her brains on this. You're absolutely welcome to do so. So if you've got any questions, you're welcome to reach out to Natasha. If you've got a requirement that Natasha can have a chat with you about, if you want, how are the schools and Matt's approaching something, how's Natasha and her organization dealing with something, if it's to go through one of the answers to one of the questions that Natasha's spoken about today, feel free to get in touch with Natasha. And Natasha, on that point, would you mind just sharing your contact details for everybody, please?
Yeah, I mean, if you go to EK Outreach Service, so www.ekoutreachservices.com, you would be able to contact the organisation, and my email address is on the contacts page. But for emailing me directly, it's natasha.chalk@ekoutreachservices.com.
Super. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd strongly recommend you get in touch with Natasha. I'm sure you've heard some really, really interesting points and angles and experiences today. So if you do have any questions, if you'd like to make contact, then Natasha has just kindly shared her details. Thank you very much for joining us today, Natasha. I've thoroughly enjoyed this podcast. I hope you have too. And thank you very much for joining us.
Lovely. Thanks, Matt.
Listeners, thank you so much. Keep up your requests as to what you would like us to focus on coming through. And we're very grateful for your continued listening and support. Thanks, Natasha.
Thanks.